yeah, we've talked about ethics throughout the semester. But today the goal of today and the next lecture is to kind of give a broad overview of some of the ethics issues that a lot of the people in the field are concerned about, and and I want to hear your thoughts of which of those you agree with and which of those you might disagree with, or ethics issues that you think are being missed or undervalued in the calculus of kind of what society is talking about. To start off, oh yeah, as far as business, this is not true. Neither is that. But business, we have the midterm due this Saturday night at 11:59 p.m. So make sure to take that. And please, do yourself a favor and study. Remember that you can have the study guide open until the minute that you take the exam. So do yourself that service and get 100% on it. Yeah, then we also have Lab 9 due this Saturday on diffusion models. Any questions on Lab 9? Anyone get it working? Get some cool generations? Yeah, a couple? Sweet. All right. Good. So I thought this was an opportune time for this lecture because some of you may have heard this week, the third largest cryptocurrency exchange in the world, FTX, actually, I think just this morning they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And the CEO of this company, his name is Sam Bankman-Fried, and he was also known as, well, is still known, he's, I think, still on their homepage, as one of the leading faces of a movement called effective altruism. Yeah, basically what happened is he started this cryptocurrency exchange called FTX, and they ended up using user funds that they had deposited and investing them and losing them and were unable to pay back their depositors. So that's the situation going on there. And so yeah, on this piece of news, I guess I just wanted to ask the question, what do you think are some risks of trying to do good in the world, or perhaps yeah, any risks associated with, kind of a meta question of any risks associated with trying to do good? Yeah. We're gonna give you the mic for the recording. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's also crucial that we don't underrepresent the fact that this might not have been someone trying to do good per se, and it might have just been a way to kind of take advantage of a new technology that's really exciting, and a lot of people can jump on the bandwagon and think that they're doing the next new thing, when in actuality it's kind of just the same thing that happens with a lot of financial instruments. So
definitely. And yeah, or even using the face of doing good to promote your brand, perhaps may have been part of it. Yeah. Any other thoughts on SBF and FTX? Yeah.
I was just going to say that whatever you incentivize, you get a lot of. And so we think like, oh, deforestation is bad, so let's plant more trees. But if we were to cover every square inch of ground in trees, obviously that also isn't good. And so you can, like, there's a fine line with everything that is a good thing, and who knows when is the time to stop.
Definitely. Yeah, I love that thought. And we're definitely going to talk more about that, the idea of being very careful about the incentive systems that we try to create. And especially if we're trying to whatever, especially in a world with lots of technology, we have gotten really good as a society at optimizing for objectives, especially objectives that yield money. Yeah.
I think another thing is also just know what you're putting money into, because like again, this company is a good example of like, while they, might have tried to do the right thing, like the one who owned the company might not have been making the wisest decisions or doing things that others would have agreed with. And so I think a lot of it's, know what you're getting into when you try to do good, because, sometimes they might be hiding things.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think also being careful and humble and modest about doing good. I think any kind of going off the earlier comment about optimizing for objectives. There's a tendency, especially that we have seen in machine learning, of whatever is not constrained will take on extreme values. And so if you leave the values of your weight matrices unconstrained and don't use weight normalization, your weight values will explode. And similarly, if you're trying to optimize for a certain objective, whatever is not part of that objective tends to be optimized in one direction or the other. Yeah.
Going back to the question you were asking, it makes me think about overzealousness. So I think back to, in the Book of Mormon, we read about people that try to retake the land that Laman and Lemuel's descendants had taken. And at first it seems like a great idea, but in the long term, they become captives of an oppressive, tyrannical rule, and they can't even pray. And it creates a lot more problems than it fixed.
Yeah, I love that thought of, again, trying to be humble and not overzealous in our desires. I think that these are great thoughts. So on that note, I had a couple of scriptures that I wanted to keep in mind as we talk through this lecture today. So this is from Doctrine and Covenants. Actually, it's from 104, not 103. Can I get a volunteer to read this? And as Jared reads, think about how this might apply to the technology that you develop.
It is wisdom in me, therefore, a commandment I give unto you, that you shall organize yourselves and appoint every man his stewardship, that every man may give an account unto me of the stewardship which is appointed unto him. For it is expedient that I, the Lord, should make every man accountable as a steward over earthly blessings, which I have made and prepared for my creatures. I, the Lord, stretched out the heavens and built the earth, my very handiwork, and all things therein are mine. And it is my purpose to provide for my saints, for all things are mine. But it must needs be in my own way. And behold, this is the way that I, the Lord, have decreed to provide for my saints, that the poor shall be exalted, and that the rich are made low. For the earth is full, and there is enough to spare. Yea, I prepared all things, and have given unto the children of men to be agents unto themselves. Therefore, if any man shall take of the abundance which I have made, and impart not his portion, according to the law of my gospel, unto the poor and the needy, he shall with the wicked lift up his eyes in hell, being in torment.
Great. Thank you, Jared. So there's a lot here. From this, what do you think are some principles that we can take and apply to AI and deep learning and the technology that we are working on?
The scriptures here make me think about another DNC section, which says it's set by sad experience that we see on righteous dominion. And I think with AI and ML, we're seeing a lot of new power in the computing space. So I think it's important that we take a proactive role in preventing the unrighteous dominion aspect, because it seems inescapable that wherever there's power, humans will abuse it. So, I mean, you can either say, let's not create more power, but if it's already here, let's be responsible.
Great. I love that thought.
Yeah, I just it's interesting that they say like we're going to be held accountable for like what we were stewards over. And I don't think like sometimes we see all these bad things that are happening with AI or ML. But I think what we have to be aware of is that what we are over in our specific field or our specific or what we develop, like it should be, our purpose should be for it to be used for good, and we will be held accountable for those like that. Our purpose of that, what other people do with it, that's their stewardship and their accountability. But I think that we can, if we just are aware of what we're doing, I think that's like, obviously we should promote good uses of it, but we can't control everyone and to do good things with our technology. So
Great. I like that perspective, Joseph. What other principles do you think we can take from this?
So I just reading verse 17, where it says that if we don't take what we have and help other people, then we're going to also be held accountable for that. And it's kind of weird to think of like, how do you help the poor with like deep learning or like computer science, things like that. But there's definitely always applications that you can use your knowledge and like with those applications help other people, whether it be with like food resources or water management or, you know, how we, I don't know, there's always ways. So.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's one of the main takeaways of this passage is he gives us an explicit injunction of what we're supposed to do with what he has given us, and that is help the poor and needy.
Yeah, kind of going along with that. Ideally, AI is going to make it so that we don't have to work as much. It's going to do a lot of the work for us. And so the people who invent the AI that does that kind of stuff will get really rich off of it. But if they use that, like those riches to just become more powerful themselves, that's not very good. But if they try to use that to do more good, then that's good.
Great. Yeah, and I think this dovetails really nicely into the next point I have. We're going to skip that one. So today we're going to kind of focus our ethics discussion on what I will call pre-AGI risk. AGI stands for artificial general intelligence, and it's the idea of having intelligent agents beyond that are not specialized to a single task, but can basically do anything better than a human, and essentially create virtuous cycles, creating greater and greater intelligence. We're going to save discussion on those topics for next class, and today talk about some of the midterm implications of AI technology. So I wanted to talk about centralization versus decentralization and technology. So when I say centralization, I'm talking about centralization in the broadest terms. So centralization and decentralization. So this could be referring to government power. This could be referring to distribution of wealth. This could be referring to distribution of technology. So yeah, with that in mind, what do you think are some benefits of centralization?
So benefits of centralization might be it's easier to capture the value of a specific thing. So in the context of AI, that would mean that once you're able to centralize maybe a specific advancement and perhaps have like a patent on it, you're more easily able to have the people that developed that and invested in it capitalize on that value and use it for further advancements. Whereas one of the problems with, the decentralization in a lot of computing is that it's hard to capture the value of something you've created.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point that, yeah, centralization allows you to capture. Yeah, I can't say much better. Yeah, to capture the value of the things that you create, which creates virtuous cycles of you being able to create better technology. Yeah. Any other ideas for benefits of centralization?
So one thing that we talk a lot about in econ, which is a similar topic, is frictions when trading. And I think if everything is centralized, if we use this to centralize things, it gets rid of almost all of those frictions and makes the economy run much smoother and produces way better surpluses for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Yeah, just economically speaking, centralization tends to be much more efficient in the absence of monopolies and things like that. Yeah, how about what are some benefits, on the other hand, of decentralization, or you could say maybe risks of centralization?
Centralization can lead to monopolies which cut down on innovation. Innovation basically happens when you get people together and allow them to communicate. It's that communication and collective learning and sharing of ideas that allows for rapid progress, and is why technology recently has developed so much quicker than over the entire course of human history up to this point. So decentralization allows for better communication, more sharing, and then better and more rapid improvements.
Great. And I would also add competition, right? Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, a few thoughts on this. I think one of the biggest benefits to decentralizing things is kind of the stakeholders also are the ones who get to make the decisions. Ideally, this is technology that should be accessible to all of us, and we should all be able to benefit from it. And the problem sometimes when things are centralized is that you have a very small percentage of people making the decisions. And while that may like reduce some frictions, the problem is you have a lot less representation in that decision from the general public and who's making the calls. We've seen, recently with a lot of these large tech companies and the way things have been managed, and a lot of it has been due to the economic situation. But when the rubber hits the road, what we've seen is that the capital tends to concentrate, and it tends to put a few select people in power, and they can make huge decisions, just a few people that negatively impact the lives of thousands and thousands of people. And I think if something's decentralized, it means we all have a say and we all can kind of define the future we want to make with AI, instead of just kind of expecting that the people at the top will make those decisions for us.
Great. A lot of thoughts there. Yeah, I think maybe if I were to sum that up, yeah, centralization has the risk of what happens when the centralizing power fails, right? Yeah, and so on your reading list for this week, you had an article on blockchain versus AI as centralizing forces. And I don't think, or as respectively, decentralizing and centralizing forces. And that I guess, first of all, I want to say that that's a framework. That is one person's perspective, and may be true to a greater or lesser extent. So just a brief synopsis of kind of what blockchain technology is it's a technology that decentralize that where a federation of nodes or users maintain a public ledger of some information. In the case of Bitcoin, they're maintaining a public ledger of transactions between individuals. And so that, in a way, is, well, yeah, that is an example of decentralization where no one person controls the flow of money. And so it's a lot more difficult to censor that type of thing. On the other hand, we have AI, which you can think of as kind of a, I don't remember your name. Remind me your name? Noah. Yeah, like Noah was saying, technology tends to centralize power and centralize capital. And AI can do that to the nth degree. If you have one person controlling the AI, they can have the AI be doing the work of thousands of people and reaping the economic benefits of that. And so I guess I wanted to ask, perhaps challenge this dichotomy of centralization or decentralization versus centralization, and ask in general, like, is technology a centralizing force? And I want to hear arguments on both sides of this. Although, Michael, it sounds like you have a comment first, so.
Couldn't you use distributing computing to help enhance AI and help enhance the training process? Like you can create some sort of cryptocurrency where you basically give them a currency to help train your models on your a distributed computing cluster.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's and actually I think it might have just been this morning that the language model Bloom was released, which is 176 billion parameter language model, I think about on the order of GPT-3, that was trained in a very similar way to what you said. And it's open source weights and anyone can use it. Yeah, so yeah, can you make AI decentralized? And yeah, in general, is technology a centralizing or decentralizing force?
I think that technology can be a centralizing and decentralizing force. And I think if you just throughout history, you can see massive examples of both. There's definitely been instances where technology has enabled competition and has changed the force, and you've removed massive barriers of entry to large corporations and has decentralized markets. And also likewise, new emerging technologies have also given certain places really beneficial advantages that have resulted in centralizing, and that has led to some big companies like Google and Facebook. And so I think that honestly, technology has the capacity to do both, and I think that we've seen that before.
Yeah, great thoughts. I'll throw out an example. So let's take something that's not AI. Let's take Henry Ford and the assembly line. They developed this amazing technology that allowed them to produce cars amazingly efficiently. And as a result, basically ushered in the current era where basically anyone, including a lot of poor college students like us, can now drive hundreds of miles across the United States, where before we were probably constrained to about a 50-mile radius. And in the process, the Ford family became very wealthy. And yeah, so in a way that concentrated a lot of wealth, but also in general, I mean, no one was forcing people to buy cars from Ford, right? And so in a way, bringing technology allows those who create it to become wealthy, but also distributes technology enabling new capabilities to the people who that technology is provided to. Yeah, any other thoughts on technology as a centralizing force or decentralizing? Yeah.
I would probably argue that if we're talking just fundamentally, technology is only advanced when somebody with the existing resources, and that's already like in an industry, is actually investing in it. And so I would say as long as technology isn't shared freely with everybody, it just is a centralizing force, because it's just like at its fundamental, it is.
Interesting. So if I'm going to push back on that a little bit. So let's take Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They developed the Google search engine, and they do not share the profits with anyone. And they distribute it and roll it out. And everyone's using Google as a search engine, and now has access to orders of magnitude more information than they ever had before. Is it still a centralizing force, even if no one benefits from the proceeds of that technology, other than the creators?
I'm just thinking of where the money went from that. And I mean, Google's kind of famously a monopoly.
Sure. All right.
I think technology can also be used to like maximize resources. I mean, like look at the amount of money Google has made, but you could also like make the argument Google has thus produced tons of jobs, tons of resources, lots of opportunity, and has enabled businesses that were almost essentially free, like to like do things that they've never been able to do and grow in large amounts of ways. So I think technology can actually be like a very beneficial way in which everyone can benefit. I mean, the standard of living, like for example, just in the United States would not be where it is without Google, and there would be a lot less money rotating in throughout with various people. And I think with new technology comes a lot of new opportunities, comes a lot of new jobs, and comes a lot of new growth in many different industries. So I think that like, yeah, some people can benefit a lot from a product, but that's because people are paying because they feel that they benefit just as much from it.
All right. Good thoughts. Okay. Oh, we have one more.
Thank you. I like the example you shared of Henry Ford. I think it's a really complicated issue too, because while you said that Henry Ford we're not all forced to buy Ford cars. Henry Ford also, I think it's a good example of how complicated these issues can be, because Henry Ford, for example, pushed very hard to lobby against public transportation development. And there are tens of thousands of us in this country who, I have a car, but a lot of people don't have cars and can't get to places because public infrastructure has been so stripped due to car lobbying. So, while it has like democratized for some of us, it's marginalized many, many others. So it's important to like keep that in mind. And I think Jaden said something about how if there's not kind of like a restriction on it, it will become centralized. And I think we can really, I think the biggest way to stop that from happening is education. I feel like if we can all understand the technology and we understand how some of these algorithms are used in the real world and how they affect us and how they work, then we are empowered to be able to actually be a voice who can make an informed decision and can kind of control the way the future goes, again, rather than just resorting for it to just roll out the way that works best for the people up top.
Great thoughts. Yeah, I love a lot of those thoughts there. The idea of, yeah, education as a way to bridge those technology gaps. Okay, so with this in mind, yeah, we talked about how technology can be seen as a centralizing or a decentralizing force. In what way do you think that applies to evil people? And where do you think are maybe some ways in which AI makes it easier for those who have malicious intent to wield power, and ways in which it helps to counter that power. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear also from some people who we have not heard from yet. We'll get you in the back.
I feel like technology was made with the idea that you can do anything with it, right? And so coding, all sorts of these things are they're meant to be accessible to accomplish anything. So it's really hard to put limits on it. Like with the Stable Diffusion Lab, it has the not suitable for work filter, but I imagine it's not too hard to go into the code and remove that. And so sadly, just because of the nature of it, it is super accessible to evil people.
I feel like when we talk about evil, we always have some connection with centralization, because the evil always want to control everything, especially like we talk about in the Genesis. We know how Satan want to control everything. He doesn't want us to learn anything. But I think in this part, evil always try to put everything on himself, but not for the others. I think that's kind of how technology can be bad, because centralization, especially on the evil people.
Yeah, I love those thoughts, similar to what Dane was saying earlier about we have found that it is the sad tendency of almost all people, once they get a little bit of power, or we could call it centralization, to immediately begin to exercise unrighteous dominion. Yeah.
I think an interesting thing to note is no one, except for like very few exceptions, no one considers themselves evil. They are all thinking they're doing something good. It's just what they define as good is different. Whether it's just helping themselves, they think that has the highest priority or something. And the interesting connection is it's kind of the same thing that AI does. It's people that are over optimizing for one particular thing that doesn't benefit everyone, or sacrifices things in the hope to advance something else. Like these evil people, as we see them, are really just people that are doing exactly what AI does when it over optimizes one thing. So
That's very insightful. Yeah, as another example, historical, in Hitler's rise to power, what made it possible is, fear of something worse, fear of the communists in Germany or other ethnic groups, and feeling that it was better to put the power in the hands of one guy who might be a little unhinged than to for this other political group to get power. You might see some analogies for that today.
I think it's also important to remember that, again, while we want things to be accessible to everyone, there are also ways that we can keep them from being misused. Like, it was interesting, I think after the most recent census, or after last section's voting cycle, when they released the census data, they made it so that the more zoomed in you got, the more noisy it got. And so you could get general trends for, areas, but the more you try to get in, you couldn't get specific details on people or exact things on where they live. So it's harder to gerrymander or do other things, because the more fine grains you try to get, the noisier and less useful it gets. And so there are ways to add some safeguards. They may not be perfect, but it means you can at least do something.
Very interesting. Yeah. Safeguard, trying to create structural safeguards on technology.
One that comes to mind for me, it's not necessarily evil people, but it's evil outcomes. I think back to, there's a story about Yellowstone National Park, and essentially in the early eras of pioneers, all the wolves were sort of like hunted out because they were seen as a threat to the populations of other animals. But counterintuitively, it actually unbalanced the ecosystem and created a bunch of problems, big boom bust cycles for the elk. And so they had to be reintroduced very slowly. But I kind of wonder if all these gains we're seeing for us as a human race may actually counterintuitively undermine our own ecosystem. And I don't think many people could foresee that. It's kind of clear that social media in its own way has sort of been sort of a new form of digital smoking, with its own unclear damage that it's done. So maybe this will be another form of that.
Good thoughts. Yeah, Jaden.
Just to digress a little bit, I went ahead and asked the Bloom AI what it thinks the answer to this question is. And so it said, I asked it, what should we do about evil people and AI? And it answers, I think that we will have to treat them as we do today with primates and simply not allow them to reproduce. They cannot have the burden of another being alive to look after.
That's kind of scary. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point to move on with. And I think highlights the need for our next lecture on the risks of AGI. Yeah, so probably related, what can you see as being some of the implications of AI on surveillance and privacy? Perhaps for good or for ill.
If you guys have seen Captain America, the Winter Soldier, I think this is a really good, not example. Well, we have to be really careful about like using AI to maybe predict behaviors of humans based on like their socioeconomic status or like things that have happened in their life and predict like who is most likely to commit a crime. And be really careful about creating algorithms that do that and creating laws that protect against that. Because that's an example, I think, of AI that could be overreaching, like putting people in jail before they've even done anything. So.
Yeah.
I was talking to one of my bishops who works in the AI field currently, and he was telling me an exact story of what you were talking about, where he ran into an AI that a prison was using. It was a neural network to determine who should be given like how many months or how much bail or something. I can't remember, like months of sentence or something. And he realized that the AI was racist, and the creator hadn't even realized that, but made it racist. So.
Yeah, that's another great example that we are going to get to in a second. Yeah, bias in AI systems. Yeah, Joseph.
Yeah, so I think with a lot of like privacy, AI can be really helpful because we're identifying things with outdoor cameras earlier, and we can identify what's going on, what's happening, I think. So that could be really helpful in surveillance. It can be really damaging in surveillance too. I mean, like, I don't really want to be the person held accountable for like what a drone's gonna do in another country, or what drones are gonna do in our country, or like someone else's drones are gonna do in our country. So like, there's a balance, I think, but there can be some good things and some not so good things, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from what we've seen in this class, what are two domains, or what are some domains of data that current AI tends to be really good at? I'd say images, probably, and text. Yeah, and so, I mean, and these things already exist. China has a massive surveillance state, both of visual surveillance and of text-based surveillance of social media and things like that, and are able to censor discourse that is unacceptable and even prevent the movement of people in their country based on surveillance of those people and their actions and social credit scores and things like that. So yeah, these are technologies that exist, and yeah, we have to. I don't know necessarily what the solution is to maintaining our freedoms and basic human rights as laid out in the Bill of Rights in the face of these, other than by electing leaders who we feel prioritize these things. But I mean, the problem with these technologies is that you don't have to have 1,000 moderators who are manually scrolling Twitter in order to do surveillance anymore. You need one AI that is able to flag content that you are unhappy with. And so, yeah, it makes it a lot easier for these single leaders to wield disproportionate power. Yeah, related is security. With large-scale AI systems, what happens if someone else gains access to them? There's a company that I ran into just the other day called Robust Intelligence that's trying to solve this. Let's spend the rest of our time talking about bias and what. And I've purposely not defined the word bias, but I'm curious what you think are maybe how you would define bias in a machine learning model, and in what ways could that be potentially harmful?
I think a lot of bias in artificial intelligence comes from your data sets. Data sets are generated by infallible people with their own personal preferences and opinions that can be subconsciously injected into a data set. Like, for example, with our lab this week, I told it to give me a face of a person, and it spits out a white person, probably because the data set it saw had a lot more pictures of white people, even though globally ethnic white people are by far the minority. It's like, yeah, it's a bias that's built into where the artificial intelligence training data is coming from.
That's harmful. Like, what's the? I'm curious. Yeah, like, what do you?
I think that in the long run, if you aren't careful to weed out these biases, then you just end up reinforcing power structures that already exist in society. Like for example, historical redlining in the US. You don't allow African Americans to buy homes in certain areas. You force them to have the cheaper and more rundown homes. And then you can, if you're pulling AI data in training, then you can just assume, hey, this person is Black. So they shouldn't have access to as much credit as someone else because of my flawed data.
Great. Yeah. Going into, so credit scores, whether they're social credit scores or predicting crimes or predicting how long or crime recidivism rates. Yeah.
It's interesting because there's also a lot of examples, again, like Google had an issue where people of color were categorized as gorillas at one point that they then had to fix because they realized they hadn't trained it properly. Apple had a thing with their facial recognition software where it couldn't tell the difference between Asian people. So in the US, it worked fine, but in China, everyone could unlock everyone's phone initially because it wasn't trained enough, and they had to go in and fix that. And there's a lot of examples like that. I'm also in the machine learning class, and Dr. Martinez had the example of, they have some 1970s, 1980s housing data. And one of the data points that they had was what's the percentage of Black people in the vicinity? And it's kind of a, is it ethical to use that data? Because, you might be able to get better accuracy with it at the time, but obviously we wouldn't consider that ethical to use now. So, how does that factor in? And so it's interesting to see how that input data, like he was saying, has an impact on that.
Good points. can you think of any maybe situations in which so the solution to this often is to try to debias your data set. So to try to eliminate any ability of your data set to extract, or let's say, racial information. Can you see any potential issues with well-intended efforts to avoid bias?
Yeah, I think it's like, well, who determines what is racist and what is not racist? There's a lot of varying opinions about like, well, is that actually racist or is that just like normal, you know? And so I think it's, and on another note, like religion or like a bias of gender, who determines what that is? Because there's a lot of varying views. And so I think it's just really hard to know how to debias something because you're making a decision for all of society about what's actually bias.
There is in the machine learning for economics class that I took, there was a really interesting statistical proof that showed that you can't have a machine learning method that both is, I'll just use an example of like of race. If there is a disparity between two different races for whatever reason, you can't have a machine learning method that both does not take race into account, but also has the same rates of false positives and false negatives for the different races based on this outcome, whatever it is. Those two things are statistically incompatible. You cannot have both. And so I think it will be very interesting to see what we think the balance is. Are we okay with different rates of false positives, or are we okay with having machine learning methods that explicitly take race into account?
Absolutely. And I'll give two examples of that. So yeah, to sum up that point is, and this applies to deep learning as well, you cannot remove features without hurting accuracy. And so suppose we're taking Amazon recommendations into account, and there's some implicit feature of your profile that tells it about your race that allows it to provide better recommendations for you. And we debias our data set, and suddenly the recommender system provides poor recommendations for us because we've removed that information. Perhaps more intense example is I saw a paper recently where they found that an AI trained on X-rays was able to determine the race of the person being X-rayed. And so, you know, we don't want to have biased AI systems, so let's debias this AI system. And suddenly, for marginalized populations, the AI system starts performing worse. Or for minority populations that are hurt by our efforts to debias this AI system, because we've removed features that are helpful for determining treatments for them. So yeah, interesting things to think about. There are definitely harms of bias, and there are definitely, I think, harms from debiasing. And so I think it's important to be aware of those on both sides. And we will continue our ethics discussion on Monday. Have a great weekend.